Sleep. That passive activity where you just relax and rest off the day. Right? Wrong. Sleep is one active and incredibly taxing process which is responsible for replenishing energy, memory, and a great deal of health back into you. Not to mention, it consumes 1/3 of your life.
Hello everyone, my name is Serena. I'm a junior doctor who trained in the UK and is now currently working in Brisbane, Australia. And if you haven't already guessed, in today's video, I'll be deep diving into the incredibly fascinating topic that is sleep. To help me do that, I'll be looking through the lens of Matthew Walker, Professor of Neuroscience and Psychology and author of his book, Why We Sleep, The New Science of Sleep and Dreams. Being a doctor, I guess I'm in the business of promoting health, and reading about all the numerous health benefits of sleep and worse, the detriments to your health if you're not getting enough sleep, I couldn't believe how little we're taught about sleep at medical school and how it almost never forms a part of my advice or counselling with patients to emphasise the importance of sleep. So today I thought I'd sit down and share some of this science with you. Very fittingly, today's video is sponsored by Emma, who bring you all of your sleep needs in the form of mattresses, pillows and duvets, and all of their technology is driven by sleep science, but more on that later. So what exactly is sleep? You may have heard of two types of sleep that we have: rapid eye movement sleep, or REM sleep, and non-rapid eye movement sleep, non-REM sleep. If we were to plot that on a graph, it would look something like this. So if we have time on this axis and the type of sleep on this one, awake, REM, and non-REM, which has various stages, so 1, 2, and then here we can have 3 and 4. You kind of have 90-minute cycles of sleep, and you cycle between REM and non-REM pretty much every 90 minutes or so. That's your first cycle, second cycle, third cycle, fourth cycle, fifth cycle. REM to non-REM ratio changes a lot throughout the night. The first half of the night you're spending most of your time in non-REM sleep, but as the night progresses, you're spending more time in this REM stage of sleep. So what is the difference between these two types of sleep? Non-REM sleep is what we also know as deep sleep, and it's really important for memory retention and consolidation. Dr. Walker discusses loads of cool experiments in this book, and an interesting one to do with non-REM sleep was where they took a group of participants and asked them to learn a list of facts. One group was interrupted in the first half of the sleep, and the second group was interrupted in the latter half of the sleep, and then they were asked to recall those facts the next day. If you remember from the graph I showed you, non-REM sleep is more common in the first half of your sleeping, whereas REM sleep dominates the latter half of your cycle. And so the participants whose first half of the sleep was disrupted, aka they lost most of their non-REM sleep, performed significantly worse in those memory tests the next day, compared to those woken up in the second half of the night. REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep, is so named because of the rapid eye movements that occur under your closed eyelids when you're sleeping. REM sleep allows us to work on more refined skills that we really owe our success as a species to, things like emotional intelligence, creativity, and it's also the period of sleep where you have all your dreams. There were two things that absolutely blew my mind about REM sleep. Number one is the brain activities that have been recorded in this period are as active, if not more active, than the ones we see during wakefulness. And that brings me on to the second thing that is insanely cool about REM sleep, is that all your voluntary muscles are completely paralyzed during that period to prevent you from actually acting out the dreams you're having and put yourself in some very unsafe situations. So now we understand what the components of sleep are. How do we even enter this cycle? In other words, what makes us feel sleepy? Well, aside from the weariness that comes with just having to turn up every day and adult your way through life, there's also an insane neurochemical orchestra going on within your body. We all have this internal clock within us which cycles roughly every 24 hours or so, known as the circadian rhythm. This internal clock is found inside your brain, specifically a place in the middle called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. And this is roughly found in the area where the nerves from your eyes cross. This makes sense because your circadian rhythm responds to external cues, such as the presence of light, which comes in through your eyeballs and into this suprachiasmatic nucleus, and triggers the body to knowing that it's time to be awake. Similarly, at nighttime, when the eyes are sensing that it's dark, the suprachiasmatic nucleus also picks this up and lets your body know that it's time to start going to sleep. What's really cool though is that this internal clock rhythm is so powerful that we actually don't even need external stimuli to trigger it into working. In this book, Dr. Matthew Walker talks about an experiment where in the 1930s, two researchers went and lived in a cave that was in complete darkness for around 6 weeks, and amazingly, they both still retained a very predictable and very regular sleep-wake cycle, even without the external stimulus of any light. As well as the circadian rhythm ticking away in the background, there are also some chemicals that are circulating around our body that are helping us enter sleep and wake. When your suprachiasmatic nucleus realizes it's dark, it triggers a small gland in the back of your brain somewhere called a pineal gland to release a hormone called melatonin. The role of melatonin isn't actually to generate sleep, it just sort of sets the scene for your body to let it know that it is time to sleep and starts that process off. The second important chemical to know about is adenosine, and this stuff is building up in your body this very second and continues to build up until you go to sleep. Adenosine starts to build up from when you wake up and keeps increasing for the longer you're awake. It usually peaks at around 12 to 16 hours after waking up, and then when you sleep, your body rapidly clears it all, and then the cycle begins the next day again until you sleep. This rising peak creates what is known as sleep pressure, and this is what builds and builds until you fall asleep. When that sleep pressure peaks is when it causes that irresistible wave of tiredness that just hits you at the end of a very long day, or inconveniently in the middle of a social situation, and makes you just want to get home and sleep straight away. Interestingly, caffeine competes with the adenosine receptor. So instead of adenosine binding to this receptor and building that sleep pressure, that caffeine butts in instead and makes you feel temporarily more awake. Now the problem is, caffeine is eventually cleared from your body, so when it does eventually leave that receptor, all that adenosine that's been patiently waiting suddenly floods into their own receptors, and you get that overwhelming sense of tiredness again, otherwise known as a caffeine crash. So now we understand what sleep is on a biological and neurochemical level. What are the issues associated with not getting enough sleep? Well, Dr. Walker goes into this in great detail in his book, and he splits it up into the effects of sleep deprivation on your brain and on your body. Just to make sure we're on the same page, we've defined what sleep is, but we've not said how much sleep is enough. Now, the general consensus and the CDC recommended sleep guidance is that for all adults, you should be getting between 7 to 9 hours of sleep. A big disclaimer before I continue. This video isn't meant to make you feel bad or guilty for how little sleep you're getting. All the things we've discussed have hugely complicated and multifactorial risk profiles. But why I found this book so interesting and I was so desperate to share it with you is sleep is never one of the risk factors that we are ever taught about as professionals, and it's never something I hear being talked about when we're having discussions about health and well-being. I know that there are numerous unavoidable reasons why you might not be getting enough sleep, be it a shift pattern your work imposes on you, multiple episodes of waking up in the night that might be due to a medical condition, or due to these tiny little humans that we bring into the world that want our attention and food all night long. And I know it's totally unrealistic to be this zen individual who gets their 8 hours of sleep every night, night after night. But I do think, as with most things in this world, if you can take small steps to make your quality or quantity of sleep slightly better, then that can only be a good thing.
One way I've been improving my sleep recently is with the help of Emma.
Emma kindly sent me their Emma Comfort Mattress, which has won the Choice Awards in both 2021 and 2022 for Best Mattress. It was super easy to set up. It just arrived in this box where it was all rolled up, and then you just unrolled it and allowed it to set on your bed frame. And I've been using it for about 2 weeks now, and wow, have I been sleeping well. Not only is the foam super comfortable to adapt to your body shape, it's also nice and airy to allow for optimum temperature regulation for a good night's sleep. And you can up your sleep game too, because they've given me a discount code that you can use to get 5% off your mattress purchases too. What's more, they offer free delivery and a 100-day risk-free trial, so if you don't get on with the mattress, you can just send it back. They also have a 10-year warranty, so do check them out. My discount code will be in the description box below. So what effects can the lack of sleep have on the brain? Well, this book goes through some key ones. Number one being decreased attention, reduced memory capabilities, and it also does form some links between an extreme form of this, otherwise known as dementia, as well as decreased emotional rationality. Sounds kind of familiar. And links this to some psychiatric disorders, especially mood disorders such as depression and anxiety. I'm not going to go into all of that too much, but the attention span side of things I found particularly fascinating, and I think particularly relevant to a lot of us as well. One experiment in this book that simply illustrates the effect of sleep on attention is where they took a group of participants, controlled how much sleep they each had, ranging from a full 8 hours of sleep a night all the way down to keeping them awake for 3 consecutive nights, and then testing their attention through reaction times. They asked the participants to press various buttons when their lights turned on and measured their reaction times to pressing these buttons. Fairly unsurprisingly, the less sleep you'd had, the longer you took to react. But what was really compelling was that in the extreme ends of little to no sleep at all, sometimes there was no reaction whatsoever. And these periods of complete unawareness of what's going on and whether you need to react or not are also known as microsleeps. What's more, the impairment of reaction time with consecutive nights of too little sleep just increased and increased exponentially, so much so that after 10 days of sleeping 6 hours a night, which isn't even that unrealistic, let's be honest, reduced your reaction time to the equivalent of not sleeping at all for 24 hours straight. They also compared reaction times in adults who had drunk alcohol to the legal limit of driving and those who had not slept at all for 24 hours, and found that they were equally cognitively impaired. Linking these findings of attention and looking at them in a scenario where attention could not be more important, such as when you're on the road driving, really put these findings into perspective for me. So if you look at this graph that's relating the amount of sleep you've had the night before with the likelihood of having a car crash, you can see that the risk of having a car crash increases the less sleep you've had, but not linearly, but actually exponentially. So much so that by the time you're having less than 4 hours of sleep the night before, you are now at 11.5 times more risk of crashing a car than if you'd slept the recommended amount. As someone who's driven on little to no sleep quite a few times before, after night shifts, on the motorway, this was really uneasy reading, and such a testament to the fact that we need proper rest facilities for all healthcare staff who are working night shifts and out of hours. Next, let's look at some of the impacts that sleep deprivation has on your body, or in other words, your physical health. Sleep, or the lack of it, has been found to be an independent risk factor in a number of physical health conditions. And I think the best way I found to understand this is to look at the disadvantage of sleep from an evolutionary standpoint. If you think about it, for any species to thrive, they have to be able to eat, sleep, reproduce, and make sure they don't get eaten by any predators, none of which you can do when you're sleeping. So if for some reason you're not getting enough sleep or awake when you shouldn't be, then your body's going to think it's because you're not safe and that you're in danger from some tiger that's trying to eat you or something. When you're in this situation, your body activates your fight and flight mode, which causes lots of changes in your body and primes you for the eventuality that you have to run away from a tiger that wants to eat you. Unfortunately, over a long period of time, staying in this mode can have a lot of unwanted consequences. As sleep deprivation increases your fight and flight mode activation, it's going to increase your heart rate and the number of stress hormones circulating around your body, and this isn't going to be great news for your cardiovascular system. As a result, it can have a lot of cardiovascular consequences. Even after controlling for cardiac risk factors such as smoking and physical exercise, consistently not sleeping enough is shown to increase the risk of things like heart attacks, high blood pressure, and strokes. There are lots of huge studies referenced in this book which show that link, but it also mentions a huge global experiment which occurs twice a year and affects around 1.5 billion people, which is otherwise known as daylight saving time. Every spring, if you live in the Northern Hemisphere, you experience that dreaded night where you get that 1 hour less of sleep as the clocks move forward. Mind-blowingly, if you look at hospital records of hospitals across the Northern Hemisphere, you see an acute spike in the number of heart attacks that present the next day. Conversely, in the autumn, when the clocks go back and we get an extra hour of sleep that night, there is a drop in the number of heart attacks that present to hospital. Sleep deprivation is also known to increase the risk of diabetes and cause unwanted weight gain as well. Again, if we go back to our ancestors, if you're not asleep when you should be, then your body's going to kick into survival mode and activate behaviors of seeking and gathering food, because you're going to need all the energy you can get to run away from that damn tiger. Not only are you likely to eat more if you aren't sleeping when you should, I'm sure everyone's had those late night cravings that come about, but the types of food you're going to crave are going to be high sugar, high carbohydrate foods, which obviously you need to give you all the energy you need to run away. And again, I found this hugely relatable when thinking about night shifts or just those nights when you for some reason stay awake a lot later than usual and all I want is the oiliest, most sugariest fried food I can find, as nothing else really satisfies you at that time. Another aspect of health that Dr. Walker mentions being affected by the lack of sleep is your reproductive health. And again, if you want to think about the tiger chasing you, then while being in such grave danger, it's not really the time to be procreating and bringing life into this new dangerous world that you're in. So there have been reports of decreased libido, disruption to menstrual cycles, and general decrease in fertility as well. Now, if you want to talk about the process of finding a mate in the first place, then studies have also shown that you're perceived to be less attractive by other people if you've not been sleeping well consistently, which means that yes, beauty sleep is a very literal phrase. Finally, Dr. Walker also mentions the effect of sleep deprivations on your immune system, and I'm sure you've realized by now that it's no surprise that the less sleep you have, the less effective your immune system is as well. The experiment that they mentioned in this book to demonstrate that was pretty simple. They took a group of people and put them in a lab and divided them into different groups depending on how much average sleep they'd had nightly the week before. They then gave them all a dose of rhinovirus, which is otherwise known as the common cold, and then observed how their immune system responded in that following week. Unsurprisingly, at this point, there was a clear relationship between decreased amount of sleep and an increased infection rate. In those sleeping an average of 5 hours a night, the infection rate was 50%, whilst in those who were getting enough sleep a night, around 7 or 8 hours, the infection rate was much lower at around 18%. This was particularly interesting to me at the time that I read this book because I read it during my COVID isolation, and at this point I had survived nearly 2.5 years of not getting COVID even once. Even in the pre-vaccine, pre-PPE era, when I was working on all the COVID wards in the hospital, I managed to somehow not get unwell. I was wondering why I got it when I did, and when I read this, it suddenly made sense that after a whole weekend of wedding celebrations where I must have slept around 5 hours over the 2 nights, and then immediately getting on a plane to Australia, where I basically didn't sleep at all for 24 hours in between the different flights and airports, it made sense why the very next day I got very, very unwell and my immune system could not take it anymore. So by this point of reading, Dr. Matthew Walker had really driven home the fact that sleep is so important for a number of physical and mental health reasons. But after all of that doom and gloom, is there anything we can even do about it? Well, of course there is. This book ends with loads of really helpful and practical tips that you can use to nudge your sleep into a better direction, and I'll share a few of my favourite ones now. Number 1, having a regular sleeping pattern. In other words, sleeping at the same time and waking up at the same time every day. If you think back to the beginning of this video, I was talking about the circadian rhythms and the melatonin release, which follow quite a repeatable and predictable cycle day in, day out. If you can also match your activities with this cycle, then your body will just slip in and out of sleep a lot more effortlessly without panicking if you're awake when you shouldn't be, or having an alarm that rudely awakens you rather than something that your body's anticipating because of how regular it is every day. Number 2 is something that I've recently implemented, and that is to avoid caffeine after midday. I didn't know before I read this that the half-life of caffeine is 7 or 8 hours, which means that if you had a cup of coffee at around 3 p.m, then 7 or 8 hours later, so around 10 p.m, half of that's still in your system. And remember that adenosine is trying to bind to those receptors to create that sleep pressure to cause you to sleep. If caffeine's in the way, then you're not going to be as primed for sleep as you could be. If you want to clear your receptors and allow adenosine to bind in them, then it's probably best to stop having caffeine intakes at around lunchtime. Number 3 is to get rid of your gadgets. This is something that I self-profess I'm extremely bad at. When it comes to sleeping, it's not only that they are a physical distraction that are delaying our time of sleep significantly, but the blue light that they're emitting has also been shown to be harmful, decreasing the amounts of melatonin your body releases or delaying the melatonin release. I'm absolutely awful for endless scrolling before bed, so I've recently bought a digital alarm clock, which I'm trying to use as an alarm instead of my phone, which eliminates an actual need for me to have my phone at my bedside. But more often than not, the phone still sneaks in, despite my best efforts. Finally, number 4 is to create a good sleep environment. Again, you remember that circadian rhythm, we're responding to not only a decrease in light, but also a decrease in temperature to allow that circadian rhythm to understand that it's time for sleep. We can do this by having a dark and a cool room, as a drop in light and temperature synergistically act together to feed into your circadian rhythm and dictate that rise of melatonin. If you did find this interesting, then you have to check this book out. I've honestly only scratched the surface. There's so much more in here about the effects of sleep on our society, on our education system, the whole science of dreams, and so much more. I really recommend. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!